Yeah, and then I wish you all a good afternoon. Thank you for joining this webinar. The objective of this webinar is to make a practical start on sharing of data between terminals, infrastructure managers and railway undertakings, and doing that at the European level. I'm kicking off this I will kick off this webinar with giving you a brief review on how the issue has developed in the past years. And then we will listen to 3 speakers who will inform you on what they are actually doing to enable and facilitate data sharing with terminals. The first speaker will be Michael Varka, who is an expert of the European Rail Agency, ERA, and he's responsible for the TAF TSI, amongst others. But Michael will tell you what else he's doing. Then will be speaking Erik Feijen, who is Technical Director of the International Road Rail Union, UIRR. And then we'll be speaking Arno Laroy, who is working on this issue from the Port of Rotterdam and who is responsible for the on-track system. Before we start, I should also mention that in the last 15 minutes of the webinar, the experts will be available to answer your questions, and you can submit your questions via the chat box. This is my intro, and then I'm starting to my first presentation screen. This whole thing, this started about 4 years ago, more than 4 years ago in Rotterdam. It is Rotterdam TEN-T days. The IMs, infrastructure managers, and the railway undertakings agreed to make information on estimated time of arrival available to their contract partners, and then specifically mentioning also terminals and combined transport operators. This is now more than 4 years ago. In follow-up to that agreement, which was then reached, it then found it all very exciting. From 2017 to 2019, Hupac, Combiverkeer, Merz Italia, Lineas, and Railcargo Austria, they sat together under the leadership of UIR and KNV. They together said, well, okay, we will start to implement this agreement. And they did so under the Elita project, using artificial intelligence for the computation of the ETA, estimated time of arrival, and based on data which was extracted from the RailNet Europe's train information system, the TIS. In that 3 years nearly, they experienced many practical difficulties in contractual conditions to exchange information. These were all overcome. We also learned from these lessons. We learned our lessons from these experiences, and that resulted in simplification of these conditions, the administrative conditions for the exchange of information. And these conditions were then being embedded in the TAF TSI legal context. Here again, the word TAF TSI pops up. That's the core of this presentation. That's what is very crucial and important. Meanwhile, also the governments, they were working on legislation, and they developed the implementing regulation 2017/2177 on access to service facilities and rail-related services, which is also giving a legal context, a legal basis to the exchange of information. I've inserted in my presentation the sheets to extracts from firstly the TAF TSI. I'm not going to read this out, but you may see in the first line that stakeholders may exchange, are authorized to exchange the messages. That's the step forward which was made. And in particular, the messages concerned are the train running forecast message, the train ready message, train interruption message, and the ETA calculation also was then entered as an information to be exchanged. For being complete, also I took the relevant Article 7.3 from the implementing regulation, which I just mentioned, which also states, and look at the underlined section, this cooperation shall include the exchange of information on train tracking and tracing, and where available, the estimated time of arrival and departure in the event of delays and disturbances. So that makes the data sharing, in a sense, it gives it a legal context. It makes it also, in a sense, obligatory. Then we come to the core of this presentation, the data sharing with terminals. Let me firstly emphasize that this data sharing is done in 2 directions. The ETA information is going to the terminals and should be going to the terminals, and train status information should be going from the terminals, and in particular the terminals of origin, to the railway sector operator, the railway undertakings, and the infrastructure managers. What is quite I may call it an obstacle, is that in the terminals, various message formats are being used. These are not standardized, and they are also not yet TAF TSI compliant. We will be coming back to that later on in this presentation. Making this compliant, RNE, RailNet Europe, UIR, HOOPAC, Port of Rotterdam, and the DB organization, DOES, the terminal organization of DB, they are now making a practical start by using TIS as a platform for exchanging this information. This is being done by what we call by a project under the PSA call, and that includes an activity 3, which is initiating the data sharing with terminals, including the rollout of real-time information and ETA. That is now being done, and actually also already HOOPAC with the Etas system has been made compliant with TAF TSI. This is where I stop my introduction and where I would like to give the floor to Michael Varka. Michael, you have the floor now. Please proceed.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you can hear my voice correctly. I would like to give you an overview about the so-called TAF TSI. TAF TSI is an abbreviation for telematic applications for freight, and TSI is technical specifications for interoperability. And as it was already pointed out by Ed, it's European legislation. And I would like to show you the content and some hints how we can include the combined transport operators and the terminals into this TSI in the future. Next slide, please. Okay, as I said, TAF TSI is a regulation within the European Union, but also applied and applicable in Switzerland, Norway, and Liechtenstein. If you type in the number, which is _1305-2014 in Google, you will be brought to the European Union's official journal, and you can download this as a PDF file. And what is very good that this TSI is also available in 23 different languages of the European Union, among others in the Dutch language, so you can also read it in your mother tongue. And just to highlight what is the overall aim of the TAF TSI, the aim is to ensure commonly agreed ways and standards for the exchange of information in the form of electronic messages between actors, between railways, infrastructure managers, wagon keepers for the time being, but we are including more and more also elements from the combined transport system. And of course, also a little bit the harmonization of business processes in the rail freight transport. Next slide, please. Okay, if we are going to a very high level presentation of this TAF TSI, you can see what is the content of it shown as a process and the functions. We have as every logistic process planning, operation, and then after operation, some after parts. It is grayed out because it's not so important for today, but what is definitely important that we have in the planning phase the consignment note, consignment order leading to wagon loads, wagon release, wagon routing database, etc. Then when it is settled, then there is a dialogue between the infrastructure manager and the railway undertaking for pass request. Then later on, when the path is settled, then the train preparation is starting. We have to exchange in a standardized format messages for the train composition and also for the train ready message, which resets all the counters to 0. And then we are sliding into the operational part because the train is entering the public infrastructure network and begins to run on the network. And of course, a lot of things can happen there. We have the train running forecast block, which includes train running forecast and also the train running information, but it can also inform deviation from plan and service disruption if it happens during the journey, and we know all that it is happening sometimes in Europe with freight trains. What is also very important is the wagon movement, because we have to know where is the wagon, is it in the siding, is it already in the marshalling yard, does it already running on the network. So for this we have a lot of wagon events in the TAF TSI, and what is very important and also was highlighted by Ed a couple of times, the so-called estimated time of arrival of the wagon train and the consignment to the final destination. We have also some provisions for that. What is also very important, we have rolling stock reference databases because we need a lot of information about the rolling stock, which is triggering a lot of messages. Next slide, please. Okay, here you can see an example of our messages. It's estimated time arrival alert message, which means that we have agreed on a commitment ETA, but we have estimated actual ETA for a given freight wagon, which you can see in the last 3 lines of the message. And of course, we have to inform our business partners in a standardized XML way how this wagon is arriving at which time to a given destination point. Next slide, please. So, as I said, the TAF TSI was in the very beginning drafted as an interaction scheme between railway undertakings, wagon keepers, and infrastructure managers. But since the ILITA project, since more or less 3 or 4 years, we are confronting, luckily, elements from the combined transport sector as well. And I have also attended a couple of times meetings of the ILITA project. And what you see here on the screen, it is something which was generated by Ed and Eric in close cooperation with their members. Okay, can you hear me? Yes, okay. I've got a message that there's a problem with my audio. And what is very important that we have included all elements for a train run, starting from a combined transport operator, from the combined transport terminal, then going to the public infrastructure, and then arriving again to a combined transport terminal. And we try to highlight what are the new actors. You can see the 3 exclamation signs there. These are new actors, not yet in the TSI. And what is important also, we try to see what type of interaction they have between each other, which type of messages. You can see that sometimes they are sending messages in TAF XSD, say in TAF standard format, but sometimes they are using proprietary messages or Etas messages already mentioned by Ed. And for example, the Etas messages, they were at the drafting of the TAF TSI, TAF compliant messages, but I will come back to it later on. Next slide, please. Okay, what is good news that the TAF TSI will be revised starting now from September until 2022. And this is, I think, the golden opportunity to include new actors and new elements for the combined transport into the TAF TSI. You can see in the sub-bullet points that our intention is to include the new combined transport actors such as shunting operators, terminal operators, CTO, etc., into the TAF TSI, and I'm convinced that Ed and Eric and the representatives of the combined transport sector will give the input for us. What is also important that we would like to include these so-called Etas messages into the TAF TSI, not directly into our data catalog, into our scheme, but as a means of compliance. I will show on the next slides how this compliance is demonstrated. But what is very important that from Etas messages, we would like to include the S30, S34, and S36 messages linked to train composition, train running, and train running forecast. And of course, what is very important, we would like to include further details about ETA, but it's still in the hands of the sector because they will have to work with the outcome of the ILITA project, and when it's ready and it's mature enough, then we can include it into the EU regulation, into the TAF TSI. Next slide, please. Okay, here it's just an overview for you how we proceed with soft compliance. This is what we have done for the Etas messages. In the upper part, you can see that there is an applicant in the upper left orange box, and he has to submit some documents and descriptions and data schema to the agency and ask us to perform a compliance check. Then the agency, abbreviated as ERA, performs a compliance check, and we can say that If we see that it's a message fully compliant with the TAF TSI data catalog, then we say it's a fully compliant message. Otherwise, we have the other possibility to check for further mappings. And if we see that all the mandatory elements from the submitted message are there for the mandatory elements of the TAF XSD messages, then we can establish soft compliance. And at the end of this exercise, we inform the applicant that his application has led to a full or soft compliance, and all these compliance reports are published on the public website of our agency. Next slide, please. Here you can just see how this compliance is done in the real life. We have a dedicated tool for it. On the left-hand side, you can see the Etas S34 message as a kind of a schema. Then in the middle, you see a lot of arrows and transformations of the messages. On the right-hand side in the box, you see the TAF train running information message. And then we try to map with some drag and drops and with some very minor programming the messages from Etas into TAF train running information messages in order to ensure soft compliance to the TAF TSI. And you will see the result, please, on the next slide. So on the left-hand side, I think it's a little bit small maybe for this presentation, but you can see a XML message which is done according to the Etas S34 specifications. This was on the left-hand side on the previous slide, and the outcome is the result, which was on the right-hand side on the previous slide, is a TAF train running information message. So it is fully compliant to the TAF XSD if we validate it, and the conclusion is in that case that Etas can be treated as a soft compliance message to the TAF TSI because it carries all the elements which are needed for the inclusion of the combined transport world into the TAF TSI. Next slide, please. I think this is the end of my presentation. I give back to at the floor, and I think at the end there is a possibility to raise some questions. I'm more than happy to answer to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. I think this will probably raise some questions and will lead to further discussions, but that's why you're still online. I would like to give the floor to Erik Feijen, who will explain what UIR has to do with all this. Erik, the floor is yours.
Yes. Okay, I hope you hear me, because sometimes you don't feel that somebody is behind that. So, okay, good afternoon. So my name is Erik Feijen. I'm working for UIR, which is the Industry Association of Combined Transport. So maybe next slide will show the galaxy of UIR. So in the middle, you have then all the member companies that we are representing. So we are both representing the combined transport operators that was already mentioned several times. So this is on the left. On the right, you have then all the members that we are having as terminal operator, and in the middle you have then the members that are having then covering both functions for both combined transport operators and terminal. We represent more than 50% of the market in combined transport. We have roughly 45 members, so both CT operators and terminal operators. And recently we have been happy to have on board some large terminal operators like Terminal Italia, for example, representing the terminals in Italy. So this is the role of the industrialization is, of course, to promote combined transport. We promote the most common form is the road rail combined transport, and then you have all the other contacts that we have. We have a lot of contacts with national associations. So this is upper right. The main, of course, and for all the legal and the setting of the frame conditions. This is more the governmental bodies. Of course, we have the contacts with the Commission, the Parliament, and Council. And then on the bottom right, we have then all the other associations that are active. I think in the environment, I think like Rail Network, for example, for the infrastructure manager. I forgot, sorry, to mention, of course, the contact that we have with ERA for example, for the TAF TSI. Next slide, please. So UIR, I think we opened a bit our membership some years ago to the terminal, so we had to adapt a bit our activities. So here we try to sum up all the activities that we have done so far regarding digital and terminal operators. So first we had to adapt our working group. So we have a interest group only dealing with terminals. We have a digital transformation group where we of course exchange the views of the operators and what kind of role can then UIR play in the digital transformation. For that reason, we have published 1 year ago a roadmap on the digital transformation, where we have listed all the tasks and all the roles necessary to have a full benefit of the digital transformation in our sector. What is also very important, I think, we are not just a promotion association. We are doing a bit more than that. We develop really digital tools for the sector. So for those who are familiar with the ILO code, for example, this is an identification for the intermodal loading units. We would like to extend it. We are in the design and development of the so-called register of the technical characteristics of the intermodal loading units. So we try to compile with all the fleet owners more detailed information on the intermodal loading units, which will provide some benefits, I think, for the terminal operators, but also for all the users of intermodal loading units, like the infrastructure manager and the railway undertakings. Several times mentioned, I think the role of a common data exchange format in our sector is quite important. So the EDIGS is somehow the follow-up of the so-called UIR data message that was somehow developed, I think, 15 years ago or 20 years ago here within the association. And EDIGS has been then an initiative, I think, to transform the old-fashioned way into a more modern. And we have the good news that we have, thanks to our relationship with ERA and also then the work of TAF TSI, we managed, I think, to make somehow this EDIGS also then compliant, or the soft compliance with TAF TSI. But I will come back to the exact role of this message here. Important role is also to develop some registers and files. So we have some UR codes that are linked directly to the EDIGS use. So we have terminal codes, we have company codes, we have damage codes. So we have a certain of files that we are here centrally managed for the sector. New feature, as we have to integrate now the terminal operators more intensively in the TAF TSI. We are also developing some specific coding, and we will insert this directly into the so-called common reference database from RNE. So the CSD file, CRD file, where we will then introduce all the terminal that we have already coded so far by UIR directly in this central repository, then for the moment managed by RNE. Had mentioned this implementing act on service facilities. So there's one obligation to exchange data. I will come, of course, later, but there's also an obligation to promote and to publish information on the service facility. So in this context, we have developed a so-called European portal for rail service facility. It's available. It's still on prototype. We are developing then. It's now official. We are co-managing with RNE then this platform. We are promoting in the next week the use of this portal. We have just launched, for example, a survey among our member companies to have a bit their feedback on the potential use of this portal. And RNE is doing exactly the same for the infrastructure manager. And we hope really soon that a lot of service facility will join the portal, I think, to be then fully compliant with the implementing act, but also then to be part of a harmonized environment for the terminals. About regulation and standardization, so it was mentioned we were quite active in the last year TAF TSI working parties. So this was our main aim, is to integrate much more the combined transport feature. This was more the part of ERA that explain how we did it. There's another important is the so-called electronic trade transport information regulation, which impose the member states or the authorities to accept more digital exchange. And there the aim is to develop a new transport data model based on the custom data model for the B2A data exchange between the stakeholders in transportation. And then in parallel in the structure to be able to address all our needs and requirements towards ERA in the Commission. There's also a joint sector group, so meaning gathering all the associations that are active in the freight business on TAF TSI, so meaning that we are discussing all together the different points. We have the kickoff meeting next week, I think, with the ERA, and we have then elaborated a set of slides and a set of requirements to be addressed, and which should be part of the new revision. We have also then a group on terminal coding. So we had to find here a process how to integrate the terminals into this TAF TSI environment. So now it has been accepted, the process is there. And when we are starting to upload those data directly into this register. Where we are also active is to try to find projects and to find financing for digital development. So one of the key instruments that was developed 15 years ago is the so-called CESAR platform. So this is a virtual platform for tracking and tracing the loading units in combined transport. So we're speaking about departure and arrival terminal. This is the key system of the major UIR operators. Was mentioned the Etas project already several times. So this was a key project on ETAs for combined transport. And then we have a kind of follow-up project on a smaller scale called PSA call. We call it Digital Train, where we have two main activities: is to continue with the computation of ETA. So to have again an enhanced ETA. We are speaking both for ETA for the railway undertaking, but of course also then for the terminal themselves. And then comes also then the integration of the terminals into this directly. But I think you will have a much better, I think, report by Arno with the Port of Rotterdam. Next slide, please. So ADGS was mentioned several times. So ADGS, what is important is that it covers a lot of different processes and data exchange. So this is really to cover the road and the customer part and the terminal part of combined transport. So this is what you see in this circle on the top. So this is really what is covered by EDAGS, so CT operators with the LSP. There's the booking. It's also then already the exchange of information concerning what we call this expected ready for pickup time. So this ETP, which is of course the most important element for our customers, is to provide this information when the loading unit is ready to be picked up. Then we have the connections, thanks to EDGS, with the CT terminals. You have some special status. You have the booking as well, and then again you have a function related to ETA. And then we have all the relationship. You see also we have some special messages with the ports, and then we have to connect an EDIGS with the so-called railway world, so between the railway undertakings and the infrastructure manager. We have also there for the consignment node, for example, and also ETA. So there is a bilateral exchange thanks to EDIGS that some railway undertakings directly exchange ETAs with our operators. So this is the two worlds. What's important, I think, to integrate them much more. And thanks to the efforts of our member companies and also then ERA, we managed, I think, to integrate this EDIGS world with the TAF TSI. And I think it's really appreciated that this effort was not, I'm going to say, lasting for 20 years. I think within, 6 months or 1 year, we managed, I think, to combine those worlds. And I think this is highly appreciated, that we can also be flexible in the railway sector, and we can also make some improvement in a fast and efficient way. Next slide, please. So Etas was mentioned several times. It was the first project ever really trying to find a way to compute ETAs. So the graphic on the right shows you what we call about chain of ETAs. So you have then the infrastructure manager that have to exchange ETAs among themselves. Normally this is published then into the ERA-NETI system. This can then be used by the railway undertakings to calculate their own ETAs and then to exchange also among them. At the end, we need an exchange between the railway undertakings, and this was mentioned by new actors, by Michael, about the shunting operators, so about the first and last mile. So it means that we have to integrate those actors as well in order to be able to calculate this ETA for the terminal. At the end, and this is sometimes forgotten, but in the TAF TSI, very clear, normally a lead IU should then also exchange an ETA directly with the combined transport operator, so who has signed the consignment note. This is something that has to be somehow improved. There are some tests, I think, with some specific rail undertakings, but we are far from having a European here harmonized approach for ETA and the exchange of information. And then comes the next step, how the combined transport operators will then inform their customers about this ETA, and how the logistics service provider will then also then exchange this information with the shippers and the consignment. So this was the overall approach, but we had to put some boundaries here. So in the core was the combined transport operators, and they had the lead role here to select the right train, the right routes, and to provide all the data. As already mentioned by Ed, we had some difficulties to integrate all these data, so we spent a lot of time to be able to track exactly the route of a cross-border traffic. So for national traffic, it's a bit easier, but as soon as you are going international, you have to mix and to combine the so-called national numbers, and it was quite a job to reach then the status. At the end, we selected 2 service providers to evaluate then the smart ETA calculation. So we had the opportunity to exchange the data from historical basis, so meaning that we had already 1 year of past data. We had then, of course, actual real-time data coming from the RNETs, and then some actors decided also to make some wagon-based, also with the Internet of Things, so sensors that sends immediately then also data from a wagon perspective and into the system. And based on this various data sources, both both service providers managed to calculate an ETA. At the end of ELETA, we didn't achieve our KPI. So the idea was to achieve a 95% accuracy for 4-hour slots before arriving at the terminal. So we didn't achieve this accuracy because we had lack of data. So this is why we had the chance to continue with that, with this so-called digital train. And we have this activity too that focus on the continuation. So, and based on the first results, so that we have now much more data, we can, I think, somehow evaluate that we have achieved on some lines already this 95% accuracy. But of course, we have to come with a full evaluation at the end of November. Next slide, please. During the ELETA project, we had a lot of discussion about ETA and the stems. What does it mean exactly, estimated time arrival? When should it start? When should it end? So we had 2 scenarios. One was to say that you start ETA when the trains enter the IM infrastructure, and it stop when the rail undertaking will hand over it when at the exit point in the infrastructure. So this was the first point, that was a kind of mandatory requirement for the service provider, that you should then here deliver this ETA. And there was then the second scenario, where we integrate then much more the first and last mile. And we had to check also if there is a lot of consequences. I think if the trains are leaving the infrastructure and starting then to go then to the terminal. So we had then these 2 options, and we integrated very slowly during the ELETA project this notion of ETP, so estimated time of pickup. But we couldn't achieve that. So this is why, again, in this new project Digital Train, we managed to convince some of the operators. So, for example, I mentioned, so there was TUS, Hupak, and at the end also then the Port of Rotterdam, which then will report after here my speech then about the evolution of this integration. Yeah. I think you can go, but I think it was the last slide. Okay, thank you for your attention, and I'm expecting then your question regarding the role of UIR in the digitalization of combined transport.
Thank you very much, Erik. Again, questions can be asked later via the chat box. I would like to give the floor now to Arno Laroy. Arno, the floor is yours for the next 15 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Arno Laroy, and I work as a business manager for the Port of Rotterdam, and I'm responsible for several rail efficiency improvement projects where digitization, standardization are the key elements in. From the Port of Rotterdam, we have been also investing ourselves in the development of digital initiatives to listen to our stakeholders and to develop a tooling that provide the visibility on the whereabouts of the trains. So in the next couple of minutes, I will elaborate on our efforts and provide insights on data sharing in the rail logistics sector, including the last mile part. Next slide. With an unchanged logistic process for the Port of Rotterdam, it is not possible to facilitate the expected growth in the number of trains through the construction of just new infrastructure. The general signal from the rail market is that the operation of the Port of Rotterdam is complex and inefficient and can be significantly improved in terms of reliability in the chain. We believe that the quality of rail freight transport can be improved through logistical measures and further digital information exchange. So Ontrack will, in collaboration with Portbase, which is our daughter company and responsible of the development of the port community system, which is also used in other ports in the Netherlands, will be the neutral partner in innovation and technological development. Next slide. Ontrack has started in 2016, which is 4 years ago already, with the name Huddled, which stands for the Harbor Rail Operation Logistics Dashboard. So in short, Huddled changed into the name Ontrack last year, and from May 2019, Ontrack is running live in beta. In the beginning of Huddled, 2 railway undertakings, 2 container terminals and 1 dry bulk terminal were involved. And the lack of standards and use of a single unique ID by all the parties that are involved in the rail logistics chain has resulted in many learnings and redo exercises. So yeah, same as Erik also mentioned in his presentation, you have the international bit of a round trip when it's an international train, of course. Then you have the national part, which per se does not need to use the same reference as the international part. Then you have the shunting part in the port area, which is also often using different references. Then you have the container terminals or other cargo handling facilities, such as bulk terminals, that are also using their own references, which is not matching with either the shunting or the national train number or the international train number. So it took some time to find the correct way to be able to connect all the loose pieces of information. And in the meantime, we have been growing and scaling and connecting several other parties. And in the next month or so, we hope to connect the last 2 remaining railway undertakings that has a license to operate in the Netherlands. And connecting means a connection from a source system from a railway undertaking to the system of Ontrack. And next slide. So how it works, Ontrack receives information from various systems in different formats and over different interfaces. The information that is sent by the infra manager, railway undertakings, TIS and terminals all have their own standard, and therefore we have built several adapters. Those adapters that take effort, that take also time, that also leaves space for improvement. Therefore, we also are strong supporter of standardization and therefore also a supporting organization in the TAF TSI division. What we do with this information, we map it to standards that all terminals can use, or when we have to share data back to, for example, TIS in the example, we can convert it to the TAF TSI standard. That also goes for EDIGES, because EDIGES is not also a standard that is used by the maritime deep sea terminals in the port area. They have their own unique standards, also different, also provided in a different way to us, so that we also have to map towards TAF TSI. That is the effort that we are undertaking currently now at the moment. all these loose pieces. So we have a bit of the infra manager, we have a bit of the railway undertaking, we have a bit of the shunting operated in the port area. So also they have a connection with our system. And then we have also information from the terminals. Intelligence is then applied to combine that. So you have full visibility of the entire round trip, including the first and the last mile part. So in essence, when a terminal has connected and they share the information, they also share the information of their planning, and also we receive events that is providing update on progress of handling, because in essence, without progress of handling, you are not able to estimate when a terminal will be ready with cargo handling. So all these data points are required to be able to improve predictability in the rail logistics chain. Next slide. So the data that we receive is not owned by the Port of Rotterdam, nor is our aim to become the owner of the data. So we have strong agreements on data authorization mechanisms, and ensuring compliancy is also one of the main pillars within our development teams. Sharing the information to third party require written consent by the relevant data owners. And currently we are in progress of mapping terminal information to TAF TSI standards. And we have written consent from one major rail container terminal in the port area that is willing to allow data sharing to TIS. So there is finally a by data sharing development which provides visibility of also some terminal handling in the Port of Rotterdam area to the TIS members. And next slide. So in the beginning, when we started with Harold, or On Track now as we know it, we developed an XSD for railway undertakings to receive information on their transports. So the planning from railway undertakings that they are planning in a couple of weeks to drive a train to Basel or to a port in the Netherlands. Is received via an XSD standard, which is derived from TAF TSI, but not the same as TAF TSI. And also including in these messages are a list of wagons. And accompanied with the list of wagons is also the sections or the route that the wagons is following. So with this, we are able to follow the trains on a wagon level and also identify when a wagon set is being cut into pieces and being brought to different destinations in the same time. And also able to track when those cut pieces of the wagon set is merged back together. And these plannings we receive weeks in advance. Same with also cancellation messages from the railway undertakings. So when they plan to execute the transport, but a customer, they cancel the transport or the order with the railway undertaking, they also send a cancellation message towards On Track, so we are able to identify when the transport itself is not going to carry it out. This is also necessary for example, terminals that they make their capacity plan weeks in advance. They also have to reserve capacity, material such as crane equipment, but also personnel. So the earlier that you have the identification that transports are being carried out by parties, the better the capacity plan of container terminals or other terminals can be made. Next slide. So the terminal slots from terminals is not easy to arrange. You also have to provide the value, of course, in order, let's say, to get the information. So therefore, also not just asking data sharing is the step that we took, but also the start of developing digital applications that provide value for them and visibility. So the willingness to share data without paying vast amounts of money is therefore created. So from the major container terminals in the port area, we receive either the CSV documents that is being pushed to SFTP connections, or we are able to call terminal slot information via an API that they provide, or we are able to get it from the port community system when the terminal is sharing that with the port community system. So it kind of depends on the terminal and the system that they are using in what way they can share their information, because the software suppliers, they do not have opened up the entire TOS systems of the terminals in one standard, so they share back information. So you start simply by a CSV, and from the CSV you derive information and you create standards. And what we receive from the terminals, that also depends. Some terminals are very open. I think that's visible on the next slide, Ad. Yeah, so this is one example that we receive from a terminal. You have the date, you have the planned time that the train will be handled. You have the actual time that the train is going to handle or is already starting to handle. You have the planned time that the train is finished with the terminal, so the cargo handling itself. And then you also have the planned departure. So the planned departure is of course different from the planned finished time of the cargo handling itself. And then you also have the expected time that they start the operations, because sometimes there are agreements between rail operators or railway undertakings that they can enter the terminal facility, but maybe there's no personnel or it is not needed to immediately start operating on the train. So also that timestamp is often different from the moment that the train has arrived at the terminal. It is not per se always necessary to immediately start the cargo handling. So the more information that you have and receive from the terminal, the better estimation you can always also make, let's say, on the terminal handling itself, which in the end also works on improving predictability. Next slide, please. So this is a different example. So this is a different set of information that we receive from the terminal, and here you can see that it is much less that is being received. And that has to do with that not all the information which is in the TOS is also open for sharing, or that there are still some developments on IT to be made to open up this information to make it shareable. Next slide. Excuse me, next slide. Yeah, this is another example. So this is what we receive by calling an API from the terminal, and also in here you see that there is different information related to this trains than in the other sets of information. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so in essence, what we aim to do with OnTrack for our community, Netherlands Port of Rotterdam, and not per se only for the Port of Rotterdam, is to reduce the burden of people also in the rail logistics chain, because often information is shared in a standard by email, and then that is reinserted in a system, or part of information is with the rail operator, part of information is with the terminal, the other part is with the railway undertaking. And in essence, when information is already inserted in a community platform, then you want to reuse it. And all that information should be able to be mapped to TAF TSI to make it standard, so it's shareable also with the greater network outside the Port of Rotterdam. Next slide. So next steps, what we do is, for now, we have been developing OnTrack from the Port of Rotterdam. It has proven its value. It has been a very nice tool to also get collaboration going in a better way between the actors, and also to showcase and to prove that information sharing is able to provide value and not per se something that is going to impact your business in a negative way. So that has been a success. And now we are further going to collaborate with Portbase to also include container information, so cargo information, all kinds of other information that can be used to create a bigger value. So first thing that we're going to do is to work on the digital exchange of the container manifest, or the train composition manifest message with all relevant parties, because also there in the port area you see that it is either TAF TSI, or it is EDGES, or it is BAPLI, or it is an XML message that is being used in the various systems. So we're going to make also adapters for that to compile it to the standard TAF TSI to be able to share that information in a digital way. And then also identity and access management is something that we're going to further work on, so to make it even more advanced. For now, with OnTrack, we have arranged roles and type of organizations And with business rules, we are able, let's say, to rule out information for parties that are not allowed to see certain information, but said there are other more advanced ways of identity and access management that you can implement to avoid that information is shared with parties that are not allowed to see it. Next slide. So what we also see, and yeah, maybe that comes as a surprise. For me, it came as a surprise because it took some time before I got into contact with a terminal that did not have a TOS. So there are still terminals that either do not have a TOS, so they work with Access or with Excel, with ERP systems, which are kind of traditional, or capacity planning, which in the end results into terminal planning, and in the end results in information when a train will be handled and when the cargo handling will be executed, is also not inserted in a system that can share that information to, for example, TIS. So what we have done, and it is now an exploration, is to make a simple tool. So you can provide a tool where people can do their capacity planning. And with that, when they enter, for example, also the train number with the terminal planning, then the combination can be made with the information from TIS. So you could provide for them running information, and then also the terminal information is being inserted in the same network, which makes it then shareable to, for example, TIS. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arno. We have some minutes left to address questions if there are any. Joost, can you give us any can you let us know what the questions are?
Definitely, Alta. Thank you. A couple of questions have come in already. We've got about 9 minutes left, so I hope we can answer all the questions that are coming in. Please, for every viewer, feel free to ask any questions you want to through the chat box, and if we cannot help you within the timing of this webinar, we'll get back to you later and also add an FAQ on our website. First question is coming in, is a question specifically for Eric. Eric, are you expecting also bilateral data communication between an IM and a terminal, or will it be solely via tools like TIS?
I'm unmuted. Okay. No, definitely. If the RNA TIS, this is a discussion that we have with RNA. If they open the system to third parties, it should always be directional. So there must be a benefit for all the actors. So meaning if an IM sends the information to the terminal should also then exchange data with them. So this is exactly what we are promoting, this win-win situation between the actors, and not just have a newly directional messaging between the two actors. Yeah. This is what we are trying to do. We are starting with the terminals here to say that now the terminals have to send out information to the TIS, and they will receive then from TIS additional information. This should be the win-win situation, and we also manage that this is now free of charge, because this was also discussing if this should be charged. So the terminal operators have been seen as a key actors, and for that they are not going to charge anything. So this is also, I think, that's something to be highlighted, because some infrastructure manager were pushing to say, yeah, but this is an additional services. This is not linked to TAF TSI. This is an additional service that I promote, so I should then charge for that. So, but this is now solved, and let's really hope that with this digital train project, we can really prove and demonstrate the benefits of integrating and some terminals.
All right, thank you.
Joost, other questions?
Definitely. Connected to the subject, is the data sharing obligatory or voluntary?
Who's going to answer that question?
Well, can I take the floor?
Yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
It's Michael speaking from the European Railway Agency. So if data exchange is described in the, let's say, in the TAF TSI, then it's of course mandatory, but we have here some freedom for the actors to use different type of messages. And of course, if we will say later on then that EDIGES is compliant in the TAF TSI, then it will be also a mandatory part which must be respected by the actors of the combined transport world as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I'm allowed to add something to that, I think it is not the matter of is the information exchange mandatory. I think it is for the various suppliers and organizations also the challenge to prove that when you are asking information, that you're also providing value back to them. So then mandatory is maybe not per se always necessary.
All right, thank you. One other question is regarding the contents of the TAF TSI design. Who is responsible for it?
Who is making the TAF TSI, you're asking?
Yeah.
Yes, the TAF TSI is officially a regulation of the European Commission, but because the Commission doesn't have the real capacity to do it, it is handed over to our agency. That's why our agency has been created. So the design of the TSI is done by our agency. Of course, we are not doing it alone. We have so-called stakeholders. Stakeholders are representatives from railway undertakings, wagon keepers, infrastructure managers, and at last but not at least, combined transport operators, represented, for example, by Ed and Eric in our working party, and we all together draft this so-called TSI. This is one part. This is the legal text. Another part, what is very important, are the technical annexes where we describe the XSD, so the message and data content, because it can change much quicker than the legal text. The legal text, when it is done, it's frozen for 5, 7, 10 years. So the life cycle is rather long, but for XSDs and messages, the life cycle can be much more shorter. And for this, we have also a dedicated change control management where we work together with aforementioned partners again in order to ensure that we create stable baselines which can be deployed at European scale by the rail sector and by the combined transport operators. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. You're actually saying that it is very important for the terminals which are listening to this webinar to be giving their opinion and their input into the process. They are welcome to do that. And I think UIR is the medium for them to channel their input towards the European Commission, towards you. Other questions, Joost?
Yes, definitely. One more question, and then looking at the time, maybe that's the last question we can do, depending on the answer, of course, but it's a quite detailed question, so bear with me, please. With the TAF TSI format, legacy systems are having trouble with mapping the UIC station codes with primary and subsidiary locations. And different parties have different approaches for this mapping. Will a generic tool become available to make this translation?
This is typical questions for Michael and for Eric. Who first?
Okay, so this is what we are doing for the moment. So we have proposed to the sector if we can reuse our terminal codes. So meaning that we are internally already using with the EDIGS message a lot of codes for the terminals. If I have to address one thing, so there is the primary codes that should be then allocated by an infrastructure manager in the different member states. So this is done. You have the CAD file, you have the primary codes. That's it. So this is how the mapping has been done between UIC, and this has been now handed over to RNE. So RNE is fully in charge about this register on coding. And they, of course, have settled and implemented a process with the infrastructure manager in order to get the data of the primary codes. Now comes the question about subsidiary codes, because the primary codes are covering only the infrastructure elements of the chain. The question was, what are we going to code the other ones? And we are focusing as UIR now on the terminal side, what we call also sometimes the freight terminals. So we had to find also a process. So in the last weeks, we discussed with some of the stakeholders how to do it. So now the process has been approved. So meaning that there is an agreement that the current UIR terminal codes will be uploaded into the CAD file as subsidiary codes, and we link these terminals with a primary code. So to take an example, I don't know, there's the terminal of Busto Arsizio in Italy, for example. They are connected to 2 primary locations. This is a bit an exception. But then you have to have the UIR code and to link them to the 2 primary codes, and then this is how you can then integrate the terminals into the RNE. And from now on, there's also the agreement that the railway undertakings and the infrastructure manager will use and this as a basis for exchanging data with the terminals. Because the main problem that we have in the TIS system for the moment, there is no unique identification for the terminals. We had to find a way, and now thanks to this proposal and just last week, the first upload was successful. So it means that from now on, these codes can be used by anyone. So we have a European here harmonized approach. This was for us the key that, of course, we should avoid that the stakeholders in
I'm losing sound, Erik.
Yes, we are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Erik, we don't hear you anymore.
Maybe on a while Eric finds out if he can join us again in sound. It's also 4 o'clock already, so maybe I can. A few other questions have come in already with us as well, but we're unable to answer that at this time. We will definitely get back to you on those through email and use that on in our FAQ on the website. The questions will be posted there anonymously, by the way, but the questions will be available for, or the answers will be available for everyone. Otto, if you want to wrap the webinar up, and perhaps Eric can join us in final words as well.
Erik, are you joining in again with voice?
Do you hear me or not? No.
We hear you again.
Okay, I don't know what happened because I didn't touch anything. So okay, but I'm back. Yeah.
Okay, then I would like to thank all the attendants who are listening to this webinar. I would like to thank the speakers, of course, for their attention, and in particular, I would like to speak Joost van Deurzen, who has been leading all this and on behalf of the top sector logistics. Thanks a lot, Joost, for all the work you have done, and thanks a lot to all of you who are sharing this webinar. You will receive from us a link to the recorded version, and the questions we will answer also in this email. Thank you very much, and wish you a nice weekend. Goodbye.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye bye. Have a nice weekend.
Okay. Okay.
Goodbye.
You too. Okay. Bye. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Yeah.